Elliot. So you said that season 7 is your favourite season of classic Doctor Who. So overall, then, what do you think of it as a season? Then, so that being said, we now move on to the villains, because this season, again, despite it being quite short, they was quite creative in the things that they created. Because I think everything so far is all new. So, what did you think?
Yeah, so there's very much nothing returning in terms of villains. It was very much a season of coming up with new ideas. I think from that point of view, Spear from Space, of course, introduces us to the Autons for the very first time, who have become through. Despite only having 2 appearances in Classic Who, became such a very well-known and famous villain, I think, in many ways. They've really, I guess, even in the whole of the show, they've really only had 3 stories, and maybe if you can count the Series 5 finale, 4 stories, and yet we remember them so fondly. And so this is, of course, their initial establishing as a villain, these plastic, sort of living plastic creatures, shot with the iconic scenes of the shop window dummies breaking out, is what sort of many, I think, for younger sort of fans that were young at the time remember of the show. That sort of iconic scene of them breaking through the glass there, I think, makes them a really sort of memorable villain in that sense. I mean, they're probably reasonably easily defeated by the Doctor in the end, but I don't think that takes away from the sort of creepy aspect of them, and sort of looking at it from a point of view of never knowing about the Autons before. The idea of shop window dummies, plastic, being able to be living and walking around and things is just such a really creepy idea, and a classic sort of Robert Holmes idea, I think, in many ways. So I think that's an excellent introduction for them. Then obviously Doctor and the Silurians, hence the title, introduces us to the Silurians, who are such a very sort of interesting race in many ways. I think it sort of explores the idea of there was a race before the humans on the Earth who had to go into hibernation years and years, sort of millions of years ago, before the humans turned up, and sort of that moral dilemma of should the Silurians be allowed to take back their planet because they were here first, or not, is a really interesting one to explore. You get the classic sort of different character roles within the Silurians. You get the sort of the old considered sort of leader of their race, and the really young sort of aggressive one who wants to just kill everybody and take over control, and eventually does sort of take control of the Silurian race, but doesn't ultimately go and obviously succeed. But I do think they're quite an interesting race. I think in many ways it's difficult to tell many other stories with them, and so that's why in sort of Series 5 the Silurian story feels a little bit of a rehash to an extent of what this story was. But I think the original is an excellent story and an excellent just idea and thought-provoking in that sense. And I think the Silurians are a great sort of villain to use in that. So that's that story. Then Ambassadors of Death, I guess it's a little bit more debatable exactly who the villains are in Ambassadors of Death, because you've got the ambassadors, but they're aliens, but they're not really the villains. It's much more about General Carrington, who sort of wants to launch missiles into the sky and kill these ambassadors and things, and sort of destroy the aliens, starting in a planetary war and all that, because he sort of hates these aliens that have never really done anything against him. And there's all this sort of scheming and these mysterious things going on throughout that story that's really, really interesting. We do sort of briefly see, when the Doctor goes up into space, this sort of alien race of sorts where the ambassadors come from, but we don't really know anything much about them, to be honest. We don't know their name. We know they're not from Mars, but we really don't know anything else about them. And in many ways, that's quite interesting, that you have such a mysterious race that you just never really find anything much about. I think it's sort of showing us that as much as there's these sort of these aliens, the sort of villain of the piece is as much about these humans doing bad things as it is about the aliens. So I think that's quite an interesting way to explore it as well. And then the final story of the season, Inferno, of course, I guess the villain is in many ways is Professor Starman, and his sort of plan to penetrate the Earth's crust, to try and find all this power and this energy that he can utilize from down underneath. But then that all goes a bit wrong with this mysterious goo that creates the primords, from what I remember. I think that's pretty much how it works when you get infected and you become primords. That can't deny the prosthetics are not great. A load of just hair attached around the head and some fake teeth. And I guess a bit on the hand as well. But it wasn't the best sort of monster design you've ever seen, maybe. But there we go. It's something. But Professor Starman as a character, I do love watching sort of his kind of he's so determined, like he's dedicated his life to doing this, and he's sort of halfway through, he's starting to realize that it might not all work out, but he's not willing to stop because he's so sort of it's his life at stake, basically. Everything that he's ever worked for is at stake, and so he can't give up, even though it's clearly causing many problems, and could ultimately cause the end of the world, like it does in the parallel universe, which I think is really just a really interesting and sort of showing just this man who wasn't really a villain to start off with, just a kind of quite annoying guy who was very determined at trying to do this drilling, but by the end of it is sort of becomes a villain to an extent. I guess you could say to some degree some of the people in the parallel universe are kind of villainous to start off with, when you've got the brigade leader instead of the brigadier, and Liz playing a sort of a military person as well. Section leader, that's it, section leader Liz Shaw. So they're sort of mini villains to start off with, but then that kind of falls away as they kind of come on the doctor side a bit more as well. But yeah, there's quite a few interesting characters throughout there. So I think this season is in many ways very strong in terms of villains, and it's not all about sort of monsters in rubber suits in every story. There's some sort of more human villains, but you've got the good alien races like the Silurians, the interesting idea of the Autons. I think it's a very sort of wide ranging in the sense of the different villains and aliens and monsters in this story, which I think is really good.
And again, yeah, Elliot, I've got to absolutely agree there. So for me, the Autons, they are absolutely iconic. Yeah, my favorite. I say, yeah, my favorite villains from this season, definitely. I think, yeah, you are right. They are creepy, and the concept is genius. Just standard, everyday thing. Shop window dummy. You never ever think anything of it, but to bring it to life. And what I do actually find really interesting is actually how they contrast compared to the ones we get in Rose, because Rose, there was very stiff moving, whereas these ones, you know, especially the ones in the boiler suit, is just running about as if they're a normal person, and it's just so weird just seeing a shop window dummy just made of plastic just running about as if they're a real person. And I think the best thing has got to be is the sound effect for the gun. When you hear that sound, you know you are dead. You know and to be fair as well, it's not just like, oh, it's not a gun, it's an actual, like a rocket launcher. You're blown to pieces. Like, that's just mad. Even if you see this shop window dummy walk towards you, and then a hand opens up, you probably wouldn't expect a missile to come flying out, would you? You probably wouldn't, whatever it was. So they're absolutely just creepy and weird, and yeah, the whole hand sound effect is great, and just being blown to pieces by it is brilliant. Silurians, I think, actually are pretty well designed. Yeah, very well designed, and I do like the idea how they actually were here before us, and actually they own the planet, and then you got the whole politics behind that. Actually, what do we do? Do we allow them to share the planet with us, or do we fight back? What do we do? And obviously the Doctor's in between that, trying to sort everything out. And I do like how you said this. How you said there's like an inner conflict. You know, you've got the ones that are peaceful and are actually trying to work it out with the humans, and then you've got those who don't agree and want to like revolt and rise up and actually take control. And I love how you got that bit of conflict in itself. Obviously, within the Ambassadors of Death, you did say yes. Obviously, General Carrington. That was a great twist. We'll talk about that more. We'll talk about the story, but his twist, his whole story is really cool, and that's really very unexpected. But yeah, the Ambassadors, they're just weird. They're very mysterious. You don't know anything about them. They're threatening though. They'll come after you, and when they touch you, you're dead. So absolutely threatening. And then obviously we did see them. The actual. We got a glimpse on the space station, and we did get a glimpse when they took the helmet off down on Earth, what they looked like. But how mysterious they are, we know nothing about them. They're just acting, because they are being controlled by that little device. Obviously, it's what do you call it? It translates messages over into like code and stuff, whatever. And it's just the way they walk about it. It's just so slow and lethargic, and but it's so threatening at the same time. They're just great. And then with Inferno, Starman, absolutely mad and obsessed. An absolute lunatic, like I said. He's devoted his life to this whole thing, and even though it's falling to pieces, and he knows the world's probably going to end. He's going to see it through because he spent his whole life on this. And when you've got both parallel worlds, in both parallel worlds, he's the same guy essentially. With the other one, you got a different brigadier, a different Liz Shaw, a different unit, whereas here, both of them is exactly the same. This man, Starman, no matter which parallel world he's in, is always going to be the same guy. You're always same obsessed mad scientist who has to complete his work, because what's the point if he just ends it now? And he knows there's going to be consequences, but he just can't stop. He just cannot do it. He just cannot feel the consequences of him just doing that, because he's waited all his life just to, come up to this point and end it there. And then, as you said, with the Primoids, I wrote down Primoids, but it's the Primords. Yeah, they are weird. They are a bit threatening, but you are right. The design's a bit. I think they are similar to like the Ferals, I'd say, from Warriors Gate. Just the whole hair stuck on beards and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I suppose. I do find it a bit. I don't know how they transform when they touch the green goo. How that happens? It just does. I don't know how that would cause that effect, but anyway. But yeah, it was all right. But obviously, the main villain was Starman, and he was the one who stood out. I'd say it's very, very similar to your. So you've got just record. Why am I forgetting names when I need to know them? So, Enemy of the World, Salamander. Yeah, he's very similar to Salamander, because he's very mad and lunatic, and he's very obsessed. And then you've obviously got like Tobias Fawn. He's a bit more reserved, but still quite mad. They all have very, very similar parallels. I would definitely even like Professor Zaroff again. It's definitely, they've all got that same sort of mad, obsessed trait with them. They love the work, and they have to see it through. So we'll move on now then to the stories themselves. So they like to write them in order, give them a rating, and have a few reasons why you like the story, and you give them those ratings, and then at the end just say what you'd rate the season out of 10.
Sure. Okay. I'll just go through each story and give them roughly sort of what I would sort of rate them in a few thoughts, I think. So the first story is Spear from Space, which, according to my magical spreadsheet where I rate all the stories, I gave an 8.5 out of 10 when I last watched it. So very much a strong story. It's just such a great opener to sort of this new era. I think it was in many ways, one of the most important stories of Doctor Who history, up there with Rose and the Unearthly Child, in terms of it needed to work to bring an audience back, because as we sort of well know, in the later Patrick Troughton era, the viewing figures were dwindling a lot. They dropped well off from where they were back in sort of the early 60s with sort of William Hartnell stuff. By then, we'd really lost most of the audience, and so it needed something very different and new and exciting, and that would just grab that new audience. And I think that's exactly what Spearhead from Space did with a great, exciting new Doctor, such an interesting and action-packed plot, the introduction of Unit just giving more sort of interesting and action-based scenes they could utilise with a military organisation, which I think was so important. A really effective villain in the Autons as well, to be able to introduce the show in, a great new companion. I think just all the aspects combined in that story into what is such a very tightly knit 4-part story in Spearhead from Space to create it to being such a great way to open the series. And so I think that's why I'd rate it really, really highly. It's probably one of my favourite sort of opening stories for a Doctor, up there with the 11th Hour as one of the very, very best. Maybe Paradise as well as up there. But it's certainly right up there in just such an effective way to start a new era of the show and introduce that new Doctor. Then Doctor and the Silurians, on my spreadsheet, I gave an 8.9, which I know is very high, and a lot of people are maybe not quite such much of a fan of it as I am. But I've always adored these really long Unit third Doctor stories. They're just some of my favourites, and the different ideas, the utilisation of the military organisation of Unit as well. It's just such an interesting build-up. We go in these really interesting looking caves, which I always think the caves themselves actually look really, really effective. Sure, yes, it looks like a set because it's on videotape, but I still think that it looks really, really kind of creepy and effective. And it's this sort of slow build up of what are these mysterious creatures that are underneath the earth and in these mysterious caves. We're sort of seeing these POV shots of the Silurians in the early episodes before we get any sort of properly reveals of who they really are. I think is really a really effective way of sort of introducing the threat of them as well. and just it's just such a sort of interesting moral dilemma, which we talked about previously in this video, and I think that's sort of what creates such an interesting story. Seeing the Doctor attempting to kind of broker the peace between the two races, and it just gradually falling apart because both sides are too focused on destroying the other one, basically, and it won't accept the other side, and just keep sort of having those problems throughout the story that the Doctor's kind of trying to firefight and eventually resolve, although it not completely with obviously the Brigadier destroying the sort of caves at the end of this story. So I just think all of that's really, really effective. I also love the music in particular to this story. It's composed by Kerry Blyton, who a rare for the 70s, where Doctor Who isn't composed by Dudley Simpson. I think Kerry only did a couple of other stories for the show. I think it was Death to the Daleks and Revenge of the Cybermen. And just the unique sort of kind of very sort of almost prehistoric sound, maybe I'd describe it as, that he uses the Silurian, these such sort of unusual instruments that he's sort of incorporated into it to create these weird sort of sounds that just sort of, I think in many ways have become very iconic with this story and with the sort of sound of a Silurian in the classic series. And I think it just so perfectly fits with the sort of feeling of this story, using these sort of prehistoric instruments or prehistoric sound to fit with these prehistoric creatures. I think is just a great idea, and I think works so well and just adds to it again there as well. So that's Doctor and Silurians. Then actually, controversially, my favourite story of the season is the Ambassadors of Death. I wish I gave it a 9.0 out of 10. I know generally by fans it's not one of the most loved stories in the world, but I just adore it. I'm not going to lie. Like, it's just another 7 parts of intrigue and fun. There's so much sort of mystery throughout this story. There's this missing spaceship up in space that they're trying to sort of dock onto. There's this sort of fascinating TV broadcast that we were watching it through at the beginning of the story, which I think is such an interesting vibe and idea to use. And then just sort of building up the mystery of it. Obviously, there's so many unit action scenes. It's directed by Michael Ferguson, who's such a great sort of action-orientated director. There's that brilliant scene, I can't remember if it's episode 2 or episode 3, where there's sort of a whole massive sort of shootout with helicopters and motorbikes and all these different guns and stuff, and it's just bonkers and crazy, and I just love seeing that sort of side of Doctor Who explored in we'd seen nothing like this before this season in terms of the scale of it and the scale of these action-orientated scenes. There was nothing like it, I think. And so seeing it in this story just as one that I really, really adored. The mystery of the ambassadors, exactly who they were, what they were about, the mystery of the alien race behind them, who the real villain is and who's actually on the good side and the bad side. Because you've got General Carrington, but then he's working with the sort of government figure as well, who's a part of this story. There's also Reagan, the kind of henchman of sort of for character almost. I think throughout this story, which is quite interesting. You've got Taltalian even as well, who's sort of being blackmailed into being a villain as part of this story as well. There's just so many different villainous characters introduced into it that I think sort of creates such an interesting story behind it. And then just the sort of gradual, the Doctor going to space, back out again, and just there's just so much to love in it. And as a story, I think for me, it doesn't drag massively in the middle like some longer stories do. It's just consistently fun and interesting and in dark at points as well, but also just very sort of mysterious and intriguing throughout, which is something that I really, really love to see in a Doctor Who story. And then finally, Inferno, which I gave an 8.9 out of 10. So very, very close. All these stories get over 8.5 because I just think it's such a consistently strong season as a whole. And Inferno, I love the whole parallel universe idea. It's really the first time that it's properly explored in Classic Who. Sort of before this, that it really hasn't been used. And I feel like nowadays parallel universes are a pretty standard trope in sci-fi, but sort of back in the early 70s, it was a fairly underutilized one. And so to sort of seeing the Doctor being stuck in this mysterious, almost sort of communist or parallel universe, basically that the same project is being sort of explored in, but at a later stage, and then seeing the actual sort of playing out of the world being destroyed, I think is fascinating. It's one of the few times where you really see kind of the end of the world, the worst case scenario, everybody dying in a Doctor Who story. It just usually isn't able to happen because the Doctor's got to save the day before that happens, because the Earth obviously can't be destroyed. So seeing that, I think, is just really, really interesting. Seeing sort of the brigade leader version of the Brigadier, who's very much a coward compared to the real Brigadier in many ways, and is so just desperate to survive and will do anything to survive, and is a bit pathetic at points as well. It's just such a fascinating thing. I'm sure it was great fun for Nicholas Courtney to be able to play those two different characters throughout the story. And of course, we talked about Professor Starman as such an excellent villain as well. So yeah, overall, just another fantastic Doctor Who story. So I think overall, if I had to give this season an overall rating, I don't know if I can do 0.5s. I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I don't think I'd quite average it up to 9 out of 10. I feel like it's too much to give it a 9. Overall season of Doctor Who 9 out of 10, but maybe that's just me being a bit too critical. But yeah, it certainly is one of the absolute sort of peaks of the show, I think, in terms of a consistent run of episodes with great characters, great plots, great sort of direction and just ideas behind it. I think it overall is just such a brilliant period of Doctor Who.
To be fair, in overall feel, I do agree with you. But there's when I said at the start, this is like the perfect season. There's a reason why I said that, and yeah, I'll go through my ratings so you'll understand here. But I just can't help it when I like something so much, and I genuinely think there's barely anything wrong with it. I just can't help but give that high rating. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go in order. I'm going to go in order from bottom to top, just to
Sure.
and explain why. It was kind of hard. The top two is easy. It was the bottom two, and the one in third place. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give it more credit because I do actually think it deserves more credit for how creative and ingenuitive it was. So anyway, in at number 4, I put the Silurians in at 4 with a rating of 10 out of 10. You know exactly where this is going, don't you? So Silurians 10 out of 10. I think I could have said before. I love the Silurians. I love how the whole dilemma where we realise they actually were here first. They actually own the planet, and then the Doctor's in between, where you've got UNIT trying to destroy them, and you've got part of the Silurians trying to create peace. Well, one guy, and then the other part of the Silurians wanting to actually fight back and destroy UNIT, and then you've got there's the things the Silurians do to try to destroy units. So they come up and they spread the disease, the plague, and that's just great. I know it only happened for like 1 or 2 parts and stuff, but just added a bit of extra threat and a bit of extra danger. And again, the scenes down in the caves really, really good. The scenes with the Doctor talking to the leader of the Silurians is really cool, and just to see how they work and how they think and their sort of like their logic. And it's actually cool to see their how advanced they are down there. So that's mine in a number 4. Number 3, I have to give it to the Ambassadors of Death, because every single time it just niggles me. I just feel the Ambassadors themselves are just better than the Silurians, because they are more threatening, they are creepier, they are weirder. There's less to know about them, which makes them better, because we don't always have to know the answer to something. Like, for example, in Midnight, we don't have the answer to that. We don't know what the entity was. We just know what it was there and what it did. With these, we don't, necessarily know who they are. We just know they're there. And I love the whole twist with Carrington. Well, to be fair, the whole twist all the way through. You've got the guy in charge, like the lead of the, I can't remember the name. We had the guy at the start who was obviously sabotaging, and he was actually working for the leader of like the UN or whatever, and they was working with Carrington, and then obviously they smuggled out the ambassadors and they've taken them somewhere else, and there was obviously engineering the device to control them, and obviously at the end it was revealed actually it was Carrington who had a backstory with aliens, who had a revenge on his mind, and he wanted to actually try and take revenge. And that whole story is so complex but so simple. It's just the reveal at the end. It's just so much going on, but the thing that sticks in my mind is actually the music. I just love the music on the outside when they're outside and running about, the do 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 that upbeat electric music out. It has so much a fun feel to it. In contrast to some of the more slowed down, more serious, more tense music, that upbeat feel to it just gave it another level. It really did, and I just have thoroughly enjoyed watching it. In at number I give it a 10, by the way, if you didn't realise. In at number 2 is Inferno. I love the parallels in this. Literally the parallels. I love how we get to see both parallel worlds, how they compare and contrast, and how no matter what both was heading in the same direction. You've got the difference is in, you know, brigade leader, you got section leader with Liz Shaw, and it's really cool to see how you know how the real world's gonna end up by seeing how it ends up in the parallel world. You know, it's like time travel. You've seen the future before it happens, and so the Doctor being in that parallel world and seeing all the details, and obviously seeing parts of it that's already happened as well. So there's him and they're trying to problem solve, trying to work out, and obviously he can only can go back to the real world if he wants, and he has to try and gain their trust and, you know, trying to get them to be on his side so then he can actually get back, because if he doesn't get back, he's not going to save the world. Obviously he knows this world's pretty much doomed because there's nothing they can do about it. So yeah, obviously Starman and both of them is just absolute lunatic, so obsessed, and he's really good, but. And that's also a 10. Yeah. But in at number 1, I just love the introduction to the third Doctor with the Autons. It's spearheading from space. I just love it. I just love how he's, you know, he drops down on Earth. He's in hospital. He has like his post regenerative like nausea where he's a bit confused. He hasn't got a clue what's going off. Obviously, he wants his shoes. He knows his shoes. He's got his key inside. That's why. But I just love how it's just. He's, you know, moaning and being hysterical about his shoes, and then when the Doctor gives him the shoes, he just grabs them and just rolls over and hugs onto them and lays on the bed, you know, hugging them tight, sort of thing. And then once he's up and out of bed, he's wandering the hospital, and then obviously goes into the changing rooms. He gets his clothes, and he hops in the shower, and it's great introduction. And once they actually, you know, he's all dressed up, he's robed up, he's into action, he's saving the day, solving problems. I just think it's just such a great introduction. It's brilliant. The Autons, as we said, are great, creepy. The whole gun thing is brilliant. And even though, like you said, they've only appeared like 3 times, 4 if you include Series 5 finale, they're so iconic, so memorable. And it's odd to think that they don't really appear that much, but I've got to say that their introductory story is definitely the better one. I do feel like Terror of the Autons, I'll get more of that next time as well. It's really good, but I have to give it more to Spearhead from Space being a fantastic introduction. This is another one as well. I do feel like the music is quite good as well. The quite slow, dark, like tense music. I feel like that was quite good as well. That was carried on through all the way through. I have to give also props to the wheelchair scene. That's just funny. That is dragging him away in a wheelchair, putting him into a van, and then out of nowhere he's off that road on the wheelchair escaping. And even the music that goes along with that was a brilliant scene. Absolutely fantastic scene. So yes, season 7 for me, 10 out of 10. That's probably the only season I think out there that's probably good. I just couldn't help it, you see. I was really debating with myself. Ambassadors, do I give it a 10 out of 10? I was like, yeah, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 because this needs to be a perfect season. I just couldn't help myself. I just couldn't help seeing that complete 10 across the board and make it into a 10 because I do genuinely love this season so much. So yeah, I had to do it. I just couldn't help it myself. Obviously your rating's not too far behind, of course, and we do have the similar opinion, but I just, yeah, the 10, I just had to give it a 10. I just did. Yeah. So there you go, guys. There you have it. That was our review of season 7 of classic Doctor Who. What do you think? Put your thoughts in the comments down below. How would you rate the stories? How would you rank them? What is your favourite villains? Put them down in the comments below. Before you leave this video, go and please check out EMS Productions. Go check Elliot out. Go subscribe to his channel. It's a great channel. We all say a big thank you for Elliot for being such a great guest. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun. It's been lovely to talk about one of the best seasons of Classic Who.
Yes, it has. Now, Elliot may return in the future. We're not going to say when. He might return a lot sooner than you would expect. We'll see about that, won't we? But yeah, go and check his channel out. Go and subscribe. Go watch his videos. Absolutely brilliant channel. Go and help him out. If you like this video, give a nice big like. But also, most importantly, subscribe. I say it all the time, every single time. I have no idea what milestone we're trying to hit. So whatever it is, just hit the subscribe button and help us get towards that next milestone. Because I have no idea when this video will be out. Well, there you go, guys. That's our review of Season 7 of Classic Doctor Who. Thank you so much for watching. We shall see you next time. See ya.
Bye-bye.
And there you have it.
Brilliant.